you don't mind, I might just lead you on to another quick question here, which wasn't on our original list. But I've done some work this morning looking at standardization on disclosure and carbon reporting across ESG and CSR, but specifically stuff that the Global Reporting Initiative are doing to link in various other partners they work with. I wondered, just given that that's something I've been looking at this morning, whether there might be anything to say about how standardization, how companies report, is also vital in this space as well, in terms of actually getting the message of what they're doing out there in the most powerful way, and of course leading investment and the green money in the right directions, and of course illustrating the transparency in a really clear sense as well.
Yeah. So there was a brilliant headline in a newspaper article a couple of years ago that read lies, damn lies, and ESG, sorry. Yeah. And I think that really encapsulates where we're at in terms of the ESG market, with lots of different proprietary metrics out there. And you can see Tesla ranked #1 for ESG in one particular scoring system, and ranked bottom for auto manufacturers in another.
Yeah, of course.
So I think standardization within the market is absolutely critical to drive investor confidence, to drive consumer confidence, and I think critically from a business perspective, to avoid any accusation of greenwashing. We're currently involved in a project looking at how you develop a standardized framework to judge the sustainability of any trade or related financial transaction. It's incredibly difficult to do at a transactional level, where you're dealing with multiple geographies, different parties in a transaction.
Yeah, of course.
But ultimately, it's something we think is vital, because right now within the market, you've got different banks, different companies applying very, very different methodologies to what they call green or sustainable. And I think in terms of achieving Paris Agreement, achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, but also in terms of building public and consumer trust, a degree of standardization in terms of approaches, reporting, and data availability are absolutely key.
Brilliant, thank you. I think we've touched on power and energy, so I don't know if I'll dive too much more into this question, unless there's anything you wanted specifically to mention on how corporates should be shifting off fossil fuels sustainably and quickly. But I think
so. I think, well, just to say, I think there's an important element to this debate which often goes unmissed. I think what we've seen, particularly in the UN climate space, is a heavy focus on corporates, looking to corporates to make voluntary commitments or investment commitments. And I think that only really gets you so far. And I think one of the keys, I think, in terms of decarbonizing energy supply is government policy. So what are the right sorts of incentives? How can carbon pricing be used more effectively? How do governments get the right policy frameworks in place to mobilize finance from the private sector and bridge I think it's the $5.2 trillion investment gap for renewables that we now face. So I think policy frameworks are absolutely vital. And I think we've been very clear as a global organization in saying to governments, saying to international organizations, business is ready to step up, but what we need is effective policy instruments designed in partnership with the private sector that can help drive the necessary investments in energy production, but also energy efficiency.
Fantastic, thanks, Andrew. I think perhaps you sensed my next question, leading into net zero, which obviously certainly is a policy instrument, albeit a very confusing one across the planet. I wonder what you might say about net zero in terms of its achievability. Is it working? Is it a suitable metric for us to be using to charge towards from a corporate sense? And just whether you feel it's really achievable and perhaps the right way to be going about changing what business does.
So from our perspective, it should not only be achievable, but it's absolutely imperative. The science is quite clear that we need to achieve net zero by 2050 to stop catastrophic effects of man-made climate change.
Yeah,
I think there's no getting around that. I think that's a simple reality. I think the question of whether it's achievable, I think you can say, and I've heard this from many business leaders, you can say very clearly, yes, it is, because we have most of the technologies that are needed. what really is needed is a significant policy shift to allow the deployment of that technology, to allow changes to how business operates today, particularly in the energy sector, and really to unleash the investment that's needed. And I think what we see now is really some good commitments from countries in Glasgow last year at COP26, but little by way of detailed plans in terms of how they're going to be implemented. And we have a big network, as I said earlier, of 45 million businesses. Many of those are SMEs. If you're an SME today, you may want to make a net zero commitment. You may want to decarbonize your operations, but where is the support? Where are the policy incentives? Where are the value chain incentives to do that? So it's achievable for sure, but I think now is the time, certainly over the next 5 years, for governments to really step up with holistic, workable plans.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, that's been my experience of writing about environment and the corporate side for some 20 odd years now. Has always been the case that it's about a holistic approach and about some joined up thinking, because so often what we see is one policy comes online and then 5 years down the line it's altered or rejigged. And of course, from a business perspective, what you need to know is what the policy is in 10 years' time in order to get that investment in, to build in the tech, which is just being developed as we speak now. So it's all very much a long-term approach. I think is what you're driving at as well. And that's certainly been my experience of these things down the years. I wonder if we might close just, we started on Ukraine. Thank you for your time, I should add. Maybe we can close on the human elements of business. The pandemic has certainly changed a great deal about work and business in the last 2 years. And suddenly we find ourselves in a position which somebody on the radio was describing last night as, the closest we've been to a global conflict in 60 years or so. So I just wonder whether, given those relatively horrific human impacts, there's anything to say about the kinder and the more equitable sense of how business can develop in the future alongside the transition to sustainability, ESG and CSR, and just what else, perhaps on a nice note to finish, perhaps what else corporates can be doing to encourage a more human element of what capitalism is all about.
So I certainly think if the pandemic teaches us anything, and I think there's some very strong academic literature emerging on this, is companies that performed well were able to adapt rapidly to some of the initial lockdown and the uncertainty caused by the pandemic, were those that had high levels of engagement with their workforces. And I think that really sends a strong signal about the importance of a human-centric approach towards business, particularly in what is now a very, very uncertain environment with a pandemic and the risk of global conflict. So I think businesses that put people first in their operations through their supply chains are really the ones with the opportunity not only to survive, but thrive through a period of uncertainty. Those that don't, simply put, are taking quite a risk.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrew. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I hope we can talk again in the future. And thanks again so much for your time this afternoon.